Welcome to the Prosthetics and Orthotics Podcast with Brent Wright and Joris Peels. Hello, everyone. My name is Joris Peels, and this is another edition of the Prosthetics and Orthotics Podcast with Brent Wright. Hi, Brent. How you doing?
Hey, Joris. Doing well. Have you fully recovered from Germany and Formnext?
Kind of. I think so. My immune system managed to make it through the other end of that. But so really happy that I went, and it's nice to be back at home as well.
Well, cool. Well, I'm super glad that you're back safe, and super excited about our guest today.
Okay, so who's on?
All right, so we've got Jackie Bailey. She's a certified prosthetist, and she works with East Point Prosthetics and Orthotics. And she is our clinical director actually for all our offices. And she's pretty awesome. She was an early adopter of 3D printing, specifically in the check socket phase. And really kind of what's neat about what she does is that she has an office. We're in North Carolina. She has an office in Ohio. And so she's really leveraging kind of our design department for her office in Ohio. So it just shows how 3D printing can be used in a quote unquote remote way. You don't have to have everything right in your office. So I'm really excited to kind of hear her story, her journey in the digital space. And she's very honest about the good, bad, and the, not so great.
Okay. Well, welcome, Jackie.
Thanks so much for having me, guys.
Yeah. So first off, how did you end up in the prosthetics and orthotics space?
Yeah, growing up, I was always very into sports, athletics. It's interesting. I'm the only girl in my family. I have three brothers, and they all ended up in music, and I was the athlete. And so I got into school and like, what am I going to do with my life? And really took an interest in like physical health and education. Wasn't sure if I wanted to teach. Really started to get plugged into the world of physical therapy. I had a few sports injuries in high school and lots of physical therapy that followed. And I ended up going towards physical therapy in college. That's what I was studying. And it was on my senior year of college that I was doing an internship with a physical therapist in town. And she worked with quite a bit of amputee patients. And I got to hear a lot of their stories, and it's intriguing. If you're not in the realm of prosthetics and orthotics, you may not know that somebody's an amputee walking around, and to kind of just be upfront and personal with these folks that have come in just after getting a prosthesis. It's really interesting to hear their story and the struggles that they faced. A lot of the folks that this physical therapist worked with directly were combat veterans, and they had pretty compromised skin and tissue, and what I would consider now a hard to fit patient. And hearing their struggles, and the one guy was like, "Hey, I'm 32. I just want to be able to take care of my 3-year-old son and play with him, and I don't want to be the guy sitting in the wheelchair in the corner." And he had been with numerous prosthetists and finally found somebody that was able to actually fit him well, get him back up on his feet. And so I was a part of the post-delivery journey of rehabbing him, getting him strong. And every time he came in, I just found myself talking to him more and more and more. And maybe to a point of moderately annoying, because he was like, "Why don't you just come with me to my next visit to my prosthetist?" And I was like, "Yeah, absolutely." The rest was really history. I went to his appointment with him, talked to the prosthetist, and was like, what do you do? Like, what is this? He was like, "Come spend a day with me." And I changed my major. I applied for prosthetics and orthotics school. At that time, it was, separate. You go for one prosthetics and then go for orthotics, or vice versa. I got in, and the rest is history. So
Okay.
That's it.
I think that's a really interesting perspective. So how would you imagine you're if I'm listening to this, I'm a physical therapist. How would I, as a physical therapist, work best with the orthotist and the patient? What's that kind of like triangle? How do we make that optimal? What's the way we can communicate best these two different people?
Yeah. No, that's a great question. And I think if I'm one opinion, But I think that what I do when I work the reverse, when I work with a physical therapist, is where are my strengths and where are my weaknesses? My strengths are fitting a device appropriately that the patient can utilize to begin rehabilitation. And so for a physical therapist to know it's okay to call us in and ask questions of us and work together, because I think we're both working towards a common goal, and knowing their strengths and what they can do with a patient is really, really helpful to us, and conversely the same. And so, yeah, knowing where your strengths are and then being willing to humble yourself to ask the questions of somebody that may have a better insight into something that, you're unfamiliar with. And then the other thing I would say is physical therapists, occupational therapists, they need continuing education credits. And it would be wonderful to see them getting continuing education in the realm of prosthetics and orthotics. That would be incredibly helpful, I think, to them as they're rehabbing these patients.
And is it quite often you see that different people with different training, different kind of backgrounds, they have like kind of a different vocabulary or a different way of talking about things? Is that the same between the physical therapy and the orthotics world, that people have different ways of referring to things or different ways of thinking about stuff? Or
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think it's different experiences. A lot of these folks may have experience primarily in a hospital setting, in acute care, where they're seeing patients, right out of surgery, or patients who have never been in the hospital, or I'm sorry, physical therapists who've never been in the hospital setting, who have only done like home care after patients come in. And so they come from such a vast background that I've run into people who know a ton about prosthetics. And that makes me so excited. And I find that those are the ones who have invested time and energy into learning specifically about it. Not just their experience with patients, but saying, okay, I've got a patient who's an amputee. What do I do? And so they research, they take classes, get education, and they themselves begin putting on clinics for other physical and occupational therapy professionals on specifically one that I can think of is gait training, how to gait train amputee patients, because it can look a little bit different than somebody has two biological limbs.
okay, and another thing in a patient, I think we've talked before to a couple of patients, a couple of people that were like kind of more on the patient advocacy side and all this. As a patient going either in this physical therapy and also this prosthetic realm, you kind of get bounced between appointments from all these different people telling you what to do, kind of.
Yeah.
But what seems to be the people that have seemed to be very successful in this, they seem to be very empowered. So they somehow take control of this. And we, of course, are like here, we're going to talk to the more prosthetics nerds under the patient, right? The people that really kind of like, embrace this and went through that. Is that a kind of strategy you see being successful for patients, to feel empowered towards this process? Or how would you best advise patients to be kind of mentally?
Yeah. I think at the end of the day, when it comes to anything health related, you are your own best advocate. Quick story is yesterday I saw a patient in a facility, a nursing facility that's primarily for deaf patients. And so they have translators. We go in, we get a translator, we go see the patient. I was specifically seeing a patient for the first time, and he's blind and deaf. And I was like, okay, didn't know that he was also blind until I got there. And this guy has been an amputee for 6 years. He received a prosthesis about 5.5 years ago, and he has had no physical therapy until recently landing in this nursing home because he had a fall. He's 89 years old. He puts his own leg on every day. He does not let anyone help him. He gets up, he goes to the bathroom in the morning, he showers, he shaves, he does everything he needs to on his own. And to watch him take the initiative at every point in our appointment, we were simply just working to help regain strength since he had a fall. If you ask him one time to do something, and again, remember, we're talking to somebody who's blind and deaf. And so for them to do sign language into his hand for him to understand what they're saying, asking him, okay, we need your foot positioned in this way. From that point on, his foot was always in that position because he took the responsibility, he took the initiative, and he did it. I've got people who are young in their early 30s who have no other health issues that I can't even get them to learn how to put their own leg on. And I simply attribute that to just taking the responsibility on yourself. Be your own best advocate and learn as much as you can. In the long run, it just helps you out the most.
Okay, that's cool. That's cool. And also, like, we keep seeing that also from a reimbursement perspective, that especially the American system, which is the one we deal with most here, like, or almost
Yeah.
exclusively so far, we see issues with the reimbursement differences between the prosthetics provider, if you will, and also like the doctor and the physical therapy part as well. Is that also kind of like a difficult thing for you that you have a unique perspective on, or?
Yeah, it's definitely gotten a little trying lately. And I think it has to do with a few things. With reimbursement specifically, it's gotten a lot tighter in what insurance is covering. And so it's requiring us to get more and more detailed documentation. So we're having to reach out to the physical therapist that's working with the patient and asking them to specifically document, what are you seeing with this patient who's an amputee? What is their motivation? What are they able to do right now without a prosthesis? What do you suspect they could do with a prosthesis? What's holding them back from being more successful since they do not have a prosthesis? And then the same thing with the physician. A physician typically would see the patient, say, we've noted that they are an amputee, their skin looks good, they check them for some other things and send them on their way. Now we're having to go back to the physician and ask them to view the patient through our lens. Same thing. Are they motivated? Why are they motivated? What do they do? What do they need to do? What can't they do? And so it's really, reimbursement is good with great documentation. And that's where the shift has been. We now have to get all of these others involved to document the exact same thing that we're looking at. And oftentimes it's looked at as, well, why would we document that when that's what your job is? And it's a very fair statement. But the insurance company needs to know that what I'm seeing is what the doctor is seeing and what the physical therapist is seeing, so that it all makes sense and it keeps people honest. And I can't 100% disagree with that, but it's just been a shift that has made it quite a bit difficult to get reimbursement and get people the care that they need. And so, yeah, the documentation of it has really been a big player that we've had to reevaluate how we approach patient care and who's involved in it.
Joris, just so you know, on some of that with around the documentation and such, is we operate a lot like a pharmacy. So everything is based on a prescription and a doctor's order. Doctors, for the most part, don't have the first idea about anything prosthetic related. And so they really lean on us for this. So that it does have to be some sort of communication between a doctor and a prosthetist so the patient can get their prosthesis. Because ultimately, it's the doctor telling the insurance company this patient needs a prosthesis that gets us paid, which is the goofiest setup, I think. Our records mean as close to zero as anything in this patient's journey and chart, yet we're the ones that know the most about what the patient is going through and their capabilities and potential. So we're kind of playing this quarterback position to get ourselves the information that we need and then ultimately get paid. So in that way, it is super goofy.
Yeah, but it's weird. My dad had cancer. He's doing well now, but he had in the Dutch system, right, where he's living, he had a patient manager, which is like kind of a nurse position, who just accompanies the cancer patient on their entire journey. So she, in that case, could explain all these different doctors and all these different tests in a kind of like machine or human language, and was like his kind of like help in navigating this whole medical system and this whole thing. And she would tell him like, oh, by the way, don't eat before this test, and this test is a big deal, and that kind of like it humanized the whole process and made this whole journey much easier to kind of consume. Like, it seems to me that like this whole prosthetic system could really benefit from a similar kind of one person who's kind of like a quarterback / coach in this whole affair,
That would be amazing, because that is where we fall short. Is there used to be, and Brent, I don't know if you had a part in this, but I had heard years back that prosthetists were kind of called into the plan of care with the doctor. They'd bring a physical therapist in, the doctor in, and the prosthetist in, and they'd basically determine what the plan of care was. So everyone was essentially on the same page and documenting the same thing moving forward. Were you ever a part of anything like that, Brent?
Yeah, so that was definitely a very neat situation when you have all those people in the same room and you're just literally going through seeing a bunch of patients, creating this plan of care. Where that kind of went sideways and off the rails is a lot of times you had multiple clinicians in the room too. So of course there's other opinions and such. And for the most part, especially with the patient there, very good and everybody could get on the same page. But then it became this kind of like marketing, who's going to get the patient sort of thing. And it's kind of like the opposite of what we need too. So while I think it started off well, it gets to the end and it's like everybody's kind of, oh, I want that patient. I want that patient. And it just is it's just a weird thing to me. So it was very common in the VA. In fact, some VAs may still do it. So especially when you have other clinicians in the room that might not be their patient, or they may be vying for a new patient. So it's kind of a funny thing. And it's just an interesting intersect of caring for the patient, business, the medical side of things, and how can we do that with excellence? And I don't know that anybody's got it right yet.
Yeah. Well, and one thing to just like piggyback on that is, I think you're right. I don't think anyone has it figured out, because even though I've talked to numerous people in the industry, and it seems like at the end of the day, no matter what your business model is, no matter what your patient demographic is, who you're taking care of, and what service you're providing, everyone goes back to, it's really tough to get patients what they deserve, what they need. And it's the documentation at the end of the day, but the documentation from all of the various folks that are involved in that plan of care. And so, yeah, you're right. Everyone struggles with I think that same thing. And it's constantly a head scratcher. That's for sure.
And how about like this whole digitization thing? How are you, from your position, how do you stand over this, like the 3D scanning, the 3D printing? Are you all for it? Is it something that you're kind of a little bit, maybe have a little bit more, you're a little bit more careful with, or?
Yeah, I was pretty early on with, like Brent had said, utilizing scanning for getting check sockets. And that is a game changer. When I opened up this clinic up here, I was working essentially out of my apartment because I was on the road and back and forth. And to be able to bust out my scanner, scan what I need to, and email it off and get back what I needed without having to touch plaster, drive it somewhere, ship it somewhere, show up and modify it somewhere, and take the time. When you're launching a business or a branch of a business, being in front of patients as much as possible is what matters. And so that lessened the time that I had to take from patient care. And I'll just tell you what, I would tell anybody, it's a game changer. When we were in our office to this day, we have scanning jigs set up. We scan our stuff, send it off, and Brent and Tyler have been awesome at the design portion of it. So it's the realm I don't know, in the realm that I don't know that I want to know. These guys are like way nerdier than I am, and like I can't get to that level. And I wish I could, but it's, again, I guess it's a humbling experience too, where I have to know where my strengths are and trust them. And they've done an outstanding job with reading my mind in times where I maybe fallen a little bit short on giving them the information they need. And so I'm a huge advocate for it. I'm a big fan of it. We use a little more traditional fabrication for our definitive fabrication. And that's just simply with some of the early on snafus that we've come across with learning. One example is learning what weight category makes sense for patients to utilize 3D printing. One of the first patients I used for definitive fabrication was pretty heavy. He ended up breaking it. And he's a really big guy, into like 500 pounds plus. And so that's an extreme. And I probably wouldn't use it for that guy specifically. But when it comes to the check sockets and scanning, the ease of it and the time outside of the lab, or I'm sorry, the time that I don't have to spend in the lab is really a game changer for myself and for this clinic specifically, and now across our whole company.
Okay. And how are you about this? Because like it was mentioned, Brent mentioned a little bit before, but like, how are you about this distributed thing, like working together from all over the country, kind of at different states and stuff like that? Is that, it seems to be the future, but I could imagine that working with physical objects and real patients, it could get a little bit tricky trying to explain stuff and kind of fit stuff and all that. Is it difficult, or?
It's difficult when you have only people involved that do not have a background in prosthetics and orthotics. We do have a few people who don't have that background, but we also have people that do have that background. And so it's easy to communicate and translate what's needed via email, via drawing with Sharpie on the object that you're scanning. And so I don't find that to be too difficult. I think with like anything, there's a learning curve. And so it takes a little bit of time of finding a groove that works for you. And so I think after the first few sockets that we'd gotten back and talking to Tyler, talking to Brent on what needed adjusted or what we need to do, from there on, it was pretty automatic. And so I think that you have to approach something like this with realistic expectations. Nobody can read your mind. You have to be extra communicative at the beginning of it so that people understand what it is that you're looking for. And is that fair, Brent? Does that seem appropriate?
No, I think that's right. And I'd kind of like to get your insight too. To me, what you're doing, and you alluded to it a little bit, is that you're able to spend more time with your patients. You're sacrificing, if you say sacrificing, quote unquote, time in the lab, plaster, whatever that you would have normally modified, but you're opening up other opportunities. What would you say to clinicians that just would say, I can't give up that kind of control to let somebody else modify a device for me? Or how would you encourage them to maybe take a look, or encourage them, hey, maybe you do want to keep some of that control, but here's how you would transfer that into the digital realm?
Yeah, I actually had this conversation with a clinician the other day. And so I'm glad you brought it up, because we go to school to learn how to have our hands on things and in things and do it ourselves with our hands and with our hand skills. And so to be able to break a chunk of that off and say, well, now you can't use your hand skills because there's no lab, or we don't want you in the lab, is very tough to grasp as a clinician. We're tinkerers. We like to be doing stuff with our hands. And so to that, I would say your education is vitally important. Learning appropriate hand skills by being in the lab, spending time in a lab, working with things with your hands is incredibly important, because when you get to this stage, to be really successful, you take your hand skills and put them to play when you have a check socket in your hands. You can heat it up, you can adjust it. If you have good hand skills, you can dial in a fit quicker, easier, with way less mess, and be way more efficient and spend more time with your patient than if you took it and said, okay, I want to increase this 5-ply and I want to make more of a relief over the fibular head. You're going to carry that back to the lab and you're going to rely on some markings on that cast. You're going to rely on your memory to remember how much of an adjustment you want to make to that specific area. And when you can utilize your hand skills in front of the patient, you can look at it while it's on them, make the adjustment, and know that that's the right adjustment. And so that, to me, is stepping up your game above the level of somebody who's like, nope, I want to take this and go back to the lab and do it. Obviously, it's my one opinion, but my skill level leveled up when I spent less time in the lab, to be completely honest. And so it's a hard concept to grasp, but if you give it an opportunity and you start putting it into play, I think you'll be very, very happy with your outcomes and the time that you are given back at the end of your day, or more time to spend with other patients as well.
All right. That sounds like a lot of sense. That sounds like makes a lot of sense, guys. And what do you think of like the well, if you're looking a little bit broader, what do you think of like this whole digital working together 3D printing thing? Is it going to be the future? Like you kind of seem to have been qualifying a little bit, saying, "Hey, wait, we use it only when it's necessary." Like, do you really think that is it going to be like click print in the future, or is this going to be a real niche thing?
I do think it's the future. I do think that if you do not begin adopting it now, you're going to be pretty far behind in the future, because I think this is in the adoption phase of how do I make this work for my practice. But in the future, I think that if folks do not, and it's in various forms, right? If you don't even begin to explore it even a little bit in your practice, I would say that, you're probably doing a disservice to, your staff and to your patients. So I'm a firm believer that it is the future for sure.
Okay, that's really refreshing. I think that's really good. And well, we've asked other people this before, but you're coming from a different end of like, how do you school yourself? Because you're not a designer, but you want to use this stuff day to day. How do you school yourself in 3D printing besides working with people like Brent and stuff? What's the advice you give me to understand more and to really understand when I can apply this?
Yeah, I mean, I think trusting the folks that are the professionals in it, asking questions and pulling them to the side to ask the tough questions. Hey, I've got a patient. This is what I'm thinking. Is this something that you can do? What am I missing? Because I know one side of the story and what I'm looking to do. And then I think being able to rely on folks like Brent, like Tyler, like the folks that are in this realm to say, we can do that, or we can do that, but it's going to take quite a bit of time to design. We're going to need X amount of weeks to work this out. I think the being real and being truthful on both ends of the spectrum is really what creates success in that mix. Instead of just constantly thinking, okay, well, I'm going to 3D print everything and there's going to be no issues with it because it's 3D printed, and I just will think of something and it will magically show up at my doorstep. There's lots of things that I don't even understand that go into this. And so I think having that strong communication, educating yourself really, in my opinion, is best doing it with the person that's going to be producing that product. You can Google, you can watch videos all day, but that may not be the process that the person you're relying on is following. And so I think you need to be on the same page and work with those folks that you are relying on to receive the product that you're handing to them.
Okay, Jackie. Well, thanks. That seems very sensible. Great advice, and it's wonderful for us to hear your perspective. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you so much. Appreciate you guys.
All right, awesome. And Brent, thank you for being here as well.
Oh, this was great. And Jackie, I didn't know some of your journey, and that was some great insights. So thank you.
Of course.
All right. And thank you for listening. This is another episode of our podcast. Thank you so much for being here for us, and all the feedback, all the wonderful things you guys are saying really mean the world to us. Thanks for your time, and have a great day. Bye-bye.